For our Thursday thinking today, we are in the book of James and continuing to look at several things that James brings up and talks about in his letter. And he's got some things to say about our relationships with one another and how we should treat one another and how we should not treat one another. And that's what I want to share today and us to really think about and to ask ourselves, examine ourselves, how are we treating others and our interactions with others, or maybe lack thereof, or how we think about others, how we treat one another, because James has some serious and important things to say about it. So let's look at this together. James chapter 3, the first spot where James brings us up to want to look at today is in James chapter 3, beginning in verse 13, where he starts asking the question in verse 13, who is wise and understanding among you? What a question. Who is wise and understanding among you? And we would all maybe want that to be said of ourselves. Hey, that's me. Out of us and out of all these people, I'm definitely one who is wise and understanding. But how do we know? Well, James actually goes on to tell us how we know if we're truly wise and understanding, and that should be with the wisdom and understanding of God and His Word and what is pleasing to Him, not our own wisdom and understanding. As James shows, he says, let him show, if someone is supposedly wise and understanding, will then prove it by showing good conduct. Let him show by good conduct that his works are done in the meekness of wisdom. Meekness of wisdom. That love, that humility, that self-control that we learn from the wisdom of God. He goes on to say, but if you have bitter envy and self-seeking, selfishness in your hearts, then do not boast and lie against the truth. James again asks this question, okay, who is wise and understanding? Well, it's those who live by good conduct and have the meekness and the wisdom of God, and not those who have bitter envy and selfishness in their hearts. He says, if you have bitter envy and selfishness in your hearts, do not lie and boast against the truth, acting like, yeah, you're wise and you're understanding, because by your actions, you're proving you're not. We prove that we're wise and understanding in the Word of God when we live it, when we act the way we should be acting in good, godly, holy conduct. He goes on to say of those who would have bitter envy and selfishness in their hearts, that this wisdom, quote-unquote wisdom, does not come from above. It does not come from God, the wisdom of bitter envy and selfishness. But bitter envy and selfishness comes from the world. It is earthly, it is sensual, it is even demonic, he says. It is sinful. Bitter envy, jealousy, selfishness, all those things are of the devil. They are sinful. For where envy and self-seeking exist, there is confusion and every evil thing. Every evil thing is there. Confusion, worldliness, contention, disorder, all kinds of things that stem from worldly wisdom. But, verse 17, the wisdom that is from above, the wisdom of God, is first pure, peaceable, gentle, willing to yield, full of mercy and good fruits, without partiality and without hypocrisy. That's the wisdom of God. That's the being wise and understanding according to God by good conduct and the meekness of wisdom. The wisdom of God teaches us how to treat one another, how to serve one another, how to live together, what our relationship should be like. And that should be pure, peaceable, gentle, willing to yield, full of mercy, good fruits, no partiality, no hypocrisy. I mean, these are important things. Being pure, having good, holy conduct, being peaceable. We're called to be peacemakers. We're called to be peacemakers. And it's going to take gentleness. It's going to take humility and a willingness to yield and to give in sometimes when, maybe I want to have my way, but it's not all about me. So I'm going to yield to someone else's preferences. I'm going to be full of mercy and grace and patience and forgiveness and good fruits. No partiality. I'm going to be fair and honest. I'm not going to be a hypocrite, to where I say one thing, but then I act like another, or whatever the case may be. He then goes on to say, verse 18, now the fruit of righteousness is sown in peace by those who make peace. Are we sowing peace and righteousness? Are we making peace? Are we living in humility and meekness and gentleness and love? Or are we being bitter and contentious and selfish and jealous and whatever the case may be? We have got to be holy as God is holy. Our conduct, how we treat one another, needs to be in the wisdom of God and not the wisdom of the world. He goes on to say in chapter 4, another place where he brings up how we treat one another in James chapter 4, verse 11. He says, do not speak evil of one another, brethren. Do not speak evil of one another. He who speaks evil of a brother and judges his brother speaks evil of the law and judges the law. But if you judge the law, you are not a doer of the law, but a judge. There is one lawgiver, he says. There is one lawgiver and judge, and we know that's God, who is able to save and to destroy. Who are you to judge another? He warns us about the temptation to speak evil about one another, about people, putting people down, condemning people, thinking we're better than people, even gossiping about people, slandering people, and sometimes things that are true, sometimes things that are assumptions, sometimes things that are just flat out lies. James tells us, do not speak evil of one another. Period. And we've so got to work on that in all of our lives, and making sure that we're not speaking evil of people, but that we're full of mercy and grace and truth, wanting the best for everybody, wanting all to be saved. That's not saying we don't ever confront sin and condemn sin, but even then, how we go about it, there's a godly way to go about it and an ungodly way to go about it. And finally, in James chapter 5, verse 9, so he's told us so far about how we're to be peaceable, be merciful, have self-control, we're to serve one another, we're not to speak evil of one another. And now he tells us, do not grumble against one another, brethren. Do not grumble and groan against one another, lest you be condemned yourself, he says. Lest you be condemned or judged. Behold, the judge is standing at the door. The judge, the lawgiver, God, knows all of us, sees all of us, hears all of us, knows what's in our hearts, knows what's in our thoughts. James tells us here, do not grumble and groan and complain against one another. Brethren, we're brothers and sisters, we're family. And we've got to watch our own attitude and how we treat one another. So these are some things we need to really think about, to make sure that we're not speaking evil of one another. We're not complaining and grumbling against one another. At times there's some of that going on in different places. And social media, within churches, whatever the case may be. And then to go back and make sure we're walking by the wisdom of God, not the wisdom of the world. If we are truly going to be wise and understanding in the Word of God, then prove it by our conduct. Make it good conduct. Treating one another as we should, being peaceable and merciful and gentle, being selfless, serving God and serving one another in love. Let's think about these things James has told us and apply them. Check ourselves, check our hearts, check our lives. And if we need to make some corrections, make some corrections. And then be on guard against bitterness and selfishness and all the things that Satan wants to tempt us with and causing problems between us, between one another. Let's stand strong in the Lord, brethren. God bless.